Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Full Crew. We're running into a little bit of technical difficulties today, so we won't have all of the fancy animations we normally do, but we're going to be discussing some great topics in the land of eVTOL today. We've got some amazing guests to address the important issues. Let's get right to it, and actually, let's start with Rex at the top here. Rex, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Mike, thank you again for inviting me. It's greatly appreciated. So in my world, I'm about 48 years in aviation now. I started when I was about 14. Helicopter pilot, airplane pilot, airframe and power plant technician, and been involved in infrastructure design and development safety for about 30 years. Primarily heliports, but since 2016, I got involved with Uber, was Uber Elevate's head of infrastructure, and ever since then I've been now involved in advanced air mobility and also represent the Vertical Flight Society in all things vertical flight infrastructure. So that's my spiel.
Well, Rex, every time you're on, I'm always learning something, so I'm excited to have you back. But we also have some other great guests in the category of education. But let's go to Yolanka next. Yolanka, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Yolanka Wulff. I'm Executive Director of CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative. My background is not, at least by education or profession, in aerospace. I am a nonprofit and small business former attorney, longtime consultant. I got into electric aviation and then advanced air mobility 15 years ago through a client. And have been happily working in that arena ever since. But I come to advanced air mobility with a background in land use planning and sustainable transportation. So really with a very holistic look at the mobility aspects that are offered by advanced air mobility. And it was with that perspective that I and my co-founder Anna Dietrich formed CAMI, Community Air Mobility Initiative, a little over 5 years ago. We're a 501c3 public educational nonprofit supporting the sustainable and responsible integration of advanced air mobility into transportation systems. So we work primarily with state and local and regional transportation departments, planners, elected officials to educate and collaborate. Thanks, Mike.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. I know you've worked with Dawn a couple times in the past, but this is the first time you get to work with me. Happy to have you on the full crew finally to talk about these exciting topics. So next up, we got Alistair Blundy. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm sitting right now in the London insurance market. It's very busy here, very old. Lots of insurance business comes through here in London. I'm an aviation underwriter, but for the last year, have been completely specialized in emerging aviation risks and founded a company called Skyrisks. And we are hoping to help the advanced air mobility industry by providing them with the insurance that they need, because you can't fly without insurance.
Yeah, and it's funny since people in this domain often do think about risk, but monetary risk is not always the first thing they think about, right? But certainly, those risks do have to be controlled if this industry is going to, pun intended, get off the ground. And finally, we've got somebody who's always providing great overviews and insights, in-depth kind of articles and coverage within the AAM space and eVTOLs in general. So that's Jason Pritchard. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Jason.
Excellent, Mike. Thanks ever so much for the opportunity once again too. So for those who don't know me, Jason Pritchard, Executive Editor of eVTOL Insight. So we like to think we've got our finger on the pulse, covering all of advanced air mobility across the world as well. So we do news, podcasts, special reports. We've just been in Montreal for our latest industry conference, where we hope to share more industry leaders like we've got in this conversation now about all the opportunities, challenges, everything that makes the wonderful market that is advanced air mobility tick as well. So yeah, it's always a nice problem to have with so much news happening, but very much want to be there and sharing all these stories with our audiences across the world as well. So yeah, Mike, thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me be here, sorry.
Well, excited to have you all. And before we move on, I just want to thank our sponsors, Valmont, Mark 43, True Weather Solutions, and Aiken for making this episode possible, and also the audience for participating. Please send us your comments in the chat. If you have anything, maybe we could pass it off to our great guests here today. We're going to start with the first article. Actually, this is a request for comments with Rex. So who's requesting the comments and what are they for?
So for the last couple of years, we've been asking the FAA, what is a drone port? We're seeing a lot of these locations popping up around the country where high volume drone operations, under 55 pounds in most cases, but also looking at greater than 55 pounds. And we're seeing the areas NOTAM that they're servicing. We're not seeing the location identified. And one of the things that I'd been pushing the FAA on is what's a drone port? And the request for information came out asking individuals in the industry very recently as to what is the physical design of integrating in an airport, necessarily planning, design, and infrastructure for drone ports. And as U.S., ConOps, if you will, evolves, there's a consideration as to, okay, what is a drone port? How is it integrated? What's its airspace? What are the standards that apply to it? If you put it at an airport, what's that look like? But if you put it as an individual location, how's that integrated in the national airspace system? And when we start talking about integration, protection of each other's airspace, and when we look at UAS, it's a double-edged sword. It's like the UAS drone operation, there's an impact from general aviation, be it helicopter or fixed wing, on a drone, vice versa. There's an impact of UAS on general aviation. So that's kind of what they're looking at. So they put out their request, and I along with several other people have submitted our information, and hopefully we'll see some movement on this in the near future.
Yeah, and it's supremely important to define this, right? Because one of the things you kind of touched on a little bit is if everybody is definitionally designing their own type of drone port, how do you unify the airspace and keep it safe, right? So I think this is actually like one of the best kind of effective democratic instruments for actually getting all of the stakeholders to the plate to make sure that we have all our bases covered. I'm going to mute my mic real quick, but first, Jason, any comments or questions to go with Rex?
Yeah, thanks ever so much for that, Mike. I mean, I'm really interested and thankful, Rex, that you brought this up, as well as I'm sure everyone knows in the industry, Rex is Mr. Infrastructure. So comments like this is always gratefully appreciated as well. And I'd love to get, if this is a question that's already been submitted by the audience, Rex, it's quite subjective in terms of what a drone port is and what other people's requirements might be to what someone else is. So someone, for example, in the advanced air mobility space might have an idea of what a drone port is, as to someone who maybe is in general aviation, or even someone outside of advanced air mobility and if it was just a person on the street who would want to one day use these services, what they think that it should look like as well. So I guess my question to you, Rex, is what would you say then are the kind of considerations that for a drone port? And is there any sort of input that you're able to share with the audience, what you've been suggesting to the FAA that can then lead into it? Because I'm always, like Mike said, always keen to hear your thoughts on this too.
Well, I appreciate that, Jason. I think when we look at what we would constitute as a drone port, I think the first thing we look at is if a UAS or drone operator is out there in the community doing work, but it's doing work at different locations throughout the day and constantly moving, that's not a drone port. What we're looking at as a drone port is a fixed location that is basically permanently identified and located with a high volume of traffic coming and going into it. So when we look at what Wing's doing at Walmart, there's one in Texas. If you have several hundred operations going on a week throughout the year, and that location doesn't change, well, then what's the standard for that location? We get into fire code. Well, drones use lithium-ion batteries. How do you store those? How are they being, serviced? What's the fire standards for fire suppression and fire safety? Do all the first responders in the location know and understand that this is something that they may have to actually respond to? Do they have the proper training and equipment to do that? Are you doing it on an elevated structure that's a building? What's the building code say? Airspace, what's the airspace for a drone port look like? How does that interact and relate to heliports, vertiports, and airports? When you look at the language that the FAA currently uses in the obstruction evaluation for hazards, if you use those definitions and look at drone is considered by FAA's definition a hazard to airspace anytime it penetrates the imaginary surfaces of any of those infrastructure. So one of the key elements there is that 400 feet AGL, if you're flying a drone at 400 feet, if you're 3,200 feet from the edge of the FADO of a heliport or a drone port today, you would actually start to penetrate that imaginary surface of an approach surface. But that's if the FADO and where the drone's at is exactly the same elevation. If you have rising terrain, all of a sudden that drone can be a lot closer and penetrate and be in the approach departure path within 500 to 1,000 feet of the edge of the FADO. So that's one of those things we look as what we're trying to accomplish here is integrating this new concept and this new technology into an already crowded national airspace system to allow both to survive and both to flourish. What's a drone port? What's the space? How do I protect the airspace? A drone flies through the airspace that an aircraft has just flown through. We know that helicopters produce a significant amount of wake turbulence that have been known to cause accidents with small airplanes. I have no doubt that if a drone or a UAS flies through that same turbulence, probably take it out of the sky in an instant. So how do we separate that and make it safe so that they can function and make a living as well as the heliports and the helicopters? And then for a heliport, the one that went up in Frisco, Texas, it's less than 2,800 feet from a heliport. There's nothing on the books that captures that information and then makes it transparent to the pilots flying in that environment. There's a NOTAM that covers a huge area, but where's the origination? Where's the origination point? That's, I think, the big thing that we're looking at is what's a drone port. So I hope that helps, Jason.
Well, I think it helped me. That's for sure. I mean, just thinking a consideration about interacting with other ports, airport, heliport, etc., and all the dangers when you have basically tiny objects that are much harder to detect or near impossible to detect by radar or eye. Yeah, you definitely do have to consider what's the definition of this thing and where can it actually exist. So, Alistair, any questions or comments for Rex?
Yeah, from a security and safety point of view, I guess I can see a drone port going in someone's town and they think, I don't want that. I don't want hundreds of drones delivering things from Walmart to my neighbors. I'm going to go and vandalize it or sabotage it. How are we thinking about drone port infrastructure from that point of view?
A great question, I think, Alistair. I see some of the ones that have gone in today that specifically I'll point to what Wing has put out in some of their areas. They actually have security fences around their location. Now, beyond a security fence, I don't know what they have. When we look at the bad actors in the world, I know that there are those individuals, and I've seen and heard the discussion. Wow, that drone may be carrying something valuable. If I just let it go a little bit, then I can take it out. I can get whatever's on board. That's kind of scary. The other one is the other group that's using drones in this space heavily now, and I expect them to continue on, are the people in the medical world doing organ transfer, as well as bloodborne labs, as well as blood products being moved by drone, because you can beat the traffic and get it there much, much quicker. Security is going to be huge in that aspect. And I think there's going to be several different places. There'll be tracking systems on the drone itself. I see, sense and avoid as a huge piece of that puzzle. But at the actual location, I think this goes back to having a standard that speaks to what a quote drone port is, whether it's on an airport, a heliport, a vertiport, or it's a standalone drone port. What's that look like from a security standpoint? We do talk to that to some degree at heliports, and we're looking at that for vertiports, but we have no idea for drone ports. So how do I protect the citizens, but how do I protect the drone port from the citizens at the same time? A blank slate. There's nothing really there that I can point to that will help you at this moment in time. And I think that's why I like seeing that the RFI came out, because I think there's a lot of opportunities here for improving it so it's successful on both sides of that fence. You're muted, Mike.
You're muted, Mike.
Sorry, Yolanka, last comments before we move on. Sorry, the dog's been barking. I've been trying to keep it contained.
No worries. So my question actually kind of follows on from Alistair's, and that is, as we look at these drone ports, are there any distinctions being drawn between commercial versus non-commercial operations, or private, privately owned locations? And I'm thinking also, it could be private hobby, but it could be a private corporate campus operating, or a hospital medical facility operating within the bounds of their own private facility, larger facility, yet also, as we know, still impacting airspace and causing the same kind of concerns and risks. So I'm curious where that commercial versus non-commercial, public-private lines factor in.
I think right now it's, like I said, a blank slate. However, I think the dividing line is probably going to come down to a distance that has yet to be determined. And what that distance may be is what do we consider beyond visual line of sight? Once you go beyond visual line of sight, now all of a sudden you're doing drone operations outside of your ability to control that with visual sight. That may be one. Don't know, because no one's done it yet. I think the other piece that you touched on is a great question across the board, not just for, let's say, UAS and drone ports, but also vertiports and heliports, is what's the category? And this is the challenge we run in today, and we're seeing this play out now at the state levels, is we only have two categories of use that I can choose from. It's either public use or private use. Neither one fits this advanced air mobility space well at all. So if I say it's public use, the problem is if you read Code of Federal Regulations, it says I have to be open to the public, meaning I, as a drone pilot that just got his license yesterday, you have to allow me in. If I'm a eVTOL pilot and I've got 60 hours, got my private ticket and my eVTOL, I just purchased, and got 10 hours in it, you have to let me land at your location. That's probably going to mess up your high volume throughput model for this business case that you're trying to build. So you don't see me in a Cessna 172 and a private license going into Dallas Fort Worth and cruising up and down the same ramp that American, Delta, and United is. They don't want me over. They have a general aviation ramp. That's where I go. Problem we see at these smaller footprints is we don't have the real estate for that type of desegregation or segregation of aircraft type. But private, if I call it private, the challenge on the private side is the FAA has no enforcement on standards, number one. The FAA has no capability to protect your airspace. That's completely on you. But it also allows you to say, hey, you can land, but you can't. Or you can land, but you have to do this, this, and this. So much insurance, you have to do this type of training, all those different things. So I see an opportunity here for the long game, in that if the FAA steps up to the plate and Congress steps up to the plate, and we put in an arc to look at the regulations, there is an opportunity here to actually come up with a new category that's more on the commercial side. It could be private commercial operations. That way we can categorize private, commercial, public use. And the other one that we want to kind of keep out of this is personal use. If it's like you said, if it's just you, your location, you're not making any money, it's just you on your property, well, that's personal. We used to have that as a classification years ago, but they've done away with it. So I think going down that road, it's going to require rule change. It's better if we start now and start having that discussion, because rule changes in the United States take upwards of 6 years to accomplish, because every line of business has to weigh in. Gotcha on you, Mike.
It's certainly going to require some planning, and that actually segues us to our next article, which is Yolanka's on planning for advanced air mobility. So Yolanka, tell us a little bit about your article and why you think it's important.
Sure, thanks. And I would say, article in quotes, this is a 100-page guidebook, and as far as I know, the first of its kind. Three of us wrote this guidebook, all associated with CAMI. It was published by the American Planning Association with grant funding from the Mineta Transportation Institute. So we're very grateful to both institutes for our organizations for supporting this project. Our goal in this guidebook was to prepare, at least for today, as comprehensive a guide for urban planners, transportation planners, land use planners, planners of any type, provide a guide to advanced air mobility. So it covers everything from an introduction to advanced air mobility, kind of a state of the industry. It then goes into some of the opportunities and challenges. It has a chapter on social equity, looking in particular at some of the challenges around equity that might come with advanced air mobility. We have a chapter on vertiports, on infrastructure and multimodal integration, on the process of integrating advanced air mobility into more general planning, into comprehensive plans, into land use and zoning, and then really looking at some considerations for locating vertiports and how this new mode would integrate into a multimodal transportation system. So I think what's underlying this is that we all spend a lot of time thinking about the aviation aspects of advanced air mobility. This guidebook is designed to start looking at the transportation or mobility aspects of advanced air mobility as a mode in a transportation system, and really how it gets integrated into that system in a way that that improves mobility for everybody, and what are, in particular on the public side, what are the considerations that planners, the public agencies, and even elected officials need to think about from a policy and planning perspective as they look at advanced air mobility.
1 second.
One more comment. Because of the grant funding from the Mineta Transportation Institute, we're really pleased that this guidebook is free to anybody. You can find it on our homepage. I'll link to it on our homepage. It resides at the American Planning Association. It's one of their planning advisory service reports. Those often cost money, but because of that grant funding, it's free to anybody.
Well, Alistair, how do you feel about having a comprehensive guide? I'm sure that this is helpful in your domain of expertise to review.
Absolutely. I mean, I heard recently that 75% of Americans have never heard of an eVTOL. So this is really necessary, especially as these people are going to be making decisions that are critical to the successful adoption of the technology. I think it's so helpful having this.
Any questions, Yolanka, while you have her?
Yeah, I do. Is this, would you say, relevant across the world? Should we be sharing this in Europe and in Asia and in Australasia?
Yes, I think it is relevant across the world. There are, of course, differences in how planning takes place in different parts of the world. But we've actually done a fair amount of work at least in Europe and the UK, in conversations about the kind of similarities and applicability. And I think at the higher level, policy and planning level, and at that system level approach, it's very complementary. And if you dive into this, there are a number of sidebars written by guest authors, including Daryl Swanson. I'm sure you know Daryl, who had there's quite a long sidebar around vertiport planning in the London area, for example. So I think, yes, definitely applicable.
Jason or Rex, we got only one of you because we do have to get the episode moving along. So who wants to ask the question? Jason,
you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I wasn't going to be the one that did that as well. I just really want really quickly, Yolanka, I really applaud you and the team at CAMI for doing this document. I think anything we can do to help educate those that will be in those positions to grant planning applications. And I'm glad you mentioned Darryl very quickly, because I know I had a conversation with him about how in future these planning applications that may be submitted into the UK, America, wherever it might be, would have perhaps a vertical maybe on the top of a high-rise building, for example, as a very example as well. So the point of the question I was going to ask as well is, if there's a link, we at eVTOL Insights would be more than happy to share that with our audience as well, because I think the more we can do to spread that awareness and tell people that this document is out and free to read, I think will be very well received. So just a comment to say, like, credit where credit's due. Really appreciate this work, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Hey, thank you, Jason. I'll certainly send you the link. Mike, I know I sent it to you this morning. I don't know if it's possible to share with the people on the podcast, but Jason, I'll make a note to send it to you right afterwards.
Yeah, so Jason, you could find it in your script. Actually, we should have the link. If it's not there, I can add it later. Just let me know.
Yeah, perfect.
It should be also in the YouTube description after the show. So, Alistair, let's move on to your article. So, tell us. Let's see. So, will aerial taxis of the future be safe? Well, do you think they'll be safe? And what does this article tell us about potential safety risks?
Yeah, this is hot off the press from the Royal Aeronautical Society, just published in May this year here in London. And it is the question that my whole job is predicated on. Will aerial taxis of the future be safe? And it's a great article. It's actually sort of a taster article to whet our appetite for a paper that they produced in May. And it does something fascinating. So what it does is it takes a hypothetical future in 2035, when the industry is on its way to the JP Morgan $1 trillion valuation for the global industry for advanced air mobility. And what it does is it does what they're calling a pre-mortem crash investigation exercise. So they've taken 3 hypothetical incidents involving the failure or the crash of an eVTOL in different contexts. And then they're trying to analyze what caused it and what could have been done to avoid it. Which, as an aviation insurance underwriter, that's just the best article ever. So I love this sort of thing. So very briefly, the 3 scenarios are, firstly, an air ambulance in Southeast Asia. It suffers a thermal runaway. It loses one of the cells and it goes into thermal runaway, causes a fire. Everybody gets out, everybody's fine, but the aircraft is destroyed. And it was found that it was due to poor maintenance of the battery pack and the fact that the aircraft was designed for a slightly different mission profile to medevac. And so the battery was under higher stress than it was designed for. That was scenario 1. Scenario 2 was a hard landing in London. There was a landing pad incursion. There wasn't a contingency plan in place for an alternative landing spot. The pilot hovered for too long, consuming 2 megawatts of power. I don't think it tells us, but something like that. You've only got a few seconds at that sort of power consumption. Runs out of battery, hard landing. Again, people survive, but it says that the recommendation is that mission planning and alternative contingency landing locations are very, very important for electric aviation, particularly in urban environments. And then very briefly, the third one is an air taxi crash in a busy US city. You've got a VIP client, the pilot's doing multiple missions a day, he's got to keep his aircraft moving, and the VIP puts pressure on the pilot to land, lands when he probably shouldn't do, hits a floodlight. And so the recommendation is that pilot discipline and knowing exactly where your routes are going to be really, really important. And then the article just finishes with this quote, which I like, is, indeed, with highly redundant power systems and advanced automation, it may well be that AAM could be the safest mode of flight ever introduced, but this depends much on learning from and discussing the worst case scenarios today, which is exactly what I'm trying to do in my job.
Yeah, automation does have the potential to be safer than human beings. We've learned that in other domains, but it also takes time to work out all the processes and edge cases to make sure that we've covered them all right before we start automating. Definitely interesting considerations brought up in the article. Let's go to Rex. What are your thoughts on the topics covered here?
Well, one, I am extremely excited and happy that you're here, Alistair, because insurance is one of those things that is a big piece of the puzzle. I've been trying to get more people from your industry into this discussion. On the safety side, I think it was interesting. I was on the NASA ecosystem webinar the other day, and one of the first sessions they did was safety management systems. I was really happy to see that they did it at 2, they put it at the front. They did that first. So in looking at this industry as a whole, aviation, we learned a long time ago in the 121 world that safety management systems make a difference. But it's one of those, it's got to be correctly implemented, it's got to be correctly designed, and it's not just a book on a shelf, it's actually a culture. So there's what is the safety management, how's it adopted, how's it run, and how's it implemented. But I think from that aspect, one of the key elements for success in this space for eVTOL is currently Part 121 operators are required to have it. Part 135 operators in the United States will be required to have it. When we look at that, it's going to be, is it scalable? So Part 5 in the Code of Federal Regulations speaks to SMS. So that's your blueprint of what it should look like. Doesn't tell you how to build it. So I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for individuals coming into this space, is trying to figure out what is an SMS, how do I design it, how do I build it, and then how do I track all this information that the SMS is going to give me so that I can actually do something with it that's tangible in the real world, so I can prevent issues. And I think that's when we look at what Alistair's looking at is how do we make this safe before we have an issue? One of the things we look at is tracking and trending, and in that there's the FAA SIAS groups, the Aviation Safety Information and Analysis and Sharing. We look for issues that are systemic across the entire industry. Then we can actually share that and have an impact, not just on me, but everybody. So I think, Alistair, you hit the nail on the head with the safety piece.
You know, it's really interesting. I was recently on a flight to Japan for ICRA, which is a robotics conference, and I was sitting next to somebody who, funnily enough, is working on automated systems, that adhere to deconfliction protocols. So something like the FAA says, if two bodies in the sky are facing, you know, this trajectory and that trajectory, which way does which one go automatically, right, to deconflict the airspace. So I definitely see as you get to greater and greater automation for advanced air mobility, because that's one of the value propositions. If you can adhere to that, you're reducing the risk supremely over time. Yolanka, any comments on Alistair's article?
Yeah, this is one that really interests me as well, not only kind of with my legal background, but also just from the conversations we're having with planning agencies, departments of transportation, local and regional jurisdictions, because I think, you know, as Rex said, scalability is a huge piece here. In some ways, we already see this with conventional helicopter usage and those occasional incidents, accidents that we see. You know, I live in the Seattle area. We had a tragic crash of a news helicopter a number of years ago. And so the public is aware of what that looks like, even if it doesn't happen very often. So understanding what you know, that looks like at scale is, of course, a huge concern to public agencies and elected officials. So I think I'm not sure if there's a question so much as a comment in there, but I am curious as to how the article looks, and maybe it's in the follow-up study, looks at how scaling to the levels that that industry is envisioning is going to affect that risk assessment, as well as that integration into more public spaces.
It's a great point. And certainly in my community, in the aviation insurance community, everybody is very, very aware that one high profile incident can have a very big impact on the whole industry. And nobody wants that to happen, including us, of course. So we want to do all we can to make sure that the journey to scaled operations is as smooth as possible. And we're here for the unexpected bumps and scrapes so that the industry can continue and not worry about the volatility of something that might shut down a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, any comments or questions about making air taxis safe?
Yeah, no, thanks ever so much, Mike. And just to echo what Rex and Yolanka was talking about really as well, I know, Alistair, me and your good self had a great conversation, what feels like months ago as well, about as one of very few AAM insurance providers for this industry, you know, in an industry where aircraft weren't likely to take off or fly off literally until 2025, 2026 as well. So it's great to see all the work that you're doing now. And I guess, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, is any events or any sort of things that you're seeing, because again, when you were at the Dubai Air Show, and I know you've been at other events too, talking about this topic and kind of making people realize the work that you're doing and what can happen in the future as well. Have you been into other recent events, this year, or that you've been able to tell people the narrative that Skyrisks is doing, but also that really key topic, as Rex and Yolanka said, about insurance and how do you mitigate risk in an industry like this?
Yeah, it'd be wonderful, Jason. We've been all over the place. Been in San Diego for AUVSI, which was great. We've been at the Aviation Insurance Association. We're at Vertical Flight Society. That was an amazing event with Rex in Santa Clara. That was really good with the VFS. We're beating the drum.
And long may that continue as well. So.
Great. Actually, so just wanted to take a quick break to thank our sponsors again. So that would be Valmont, Mark 43, Aiken, and True Weather Solutions. Without them, the show would not be possible. And we also want to thank the audience who's participating right now. We had a little bit of a glitch where, if you saw, we all had Skype signals, so we lost a little bit of audio there. Sorry for that, but we're going to be moving on to the final article, which is Jason's. So Jason, tell us a little bit about Skyports to develop a network of vertiports in Ras Kaimai region. So what's going on in Ras Kaimai?
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Mike. So this article is just more in general about kind of what I'd like to talk about. And a lot of the questions people ask me, or certainly I ask a lot of my podcast guests or interviews when we do it, is which region is going to be the first one to deploy eVTOL or advanced air mobility operations? A lot of excellent work that's been done in the US, we know, certainly in Japan and Australasia. China is worth noting as well. But Middle East is taking a lot of attention at the moment as well. And the reason why I chose the Skyports one is just to give you a bit of an idea on kind of the movement that's going on as well. So I'm sure all of us in the audience already know about this particular story. The story I've chosen in question is Skyports, so the London-based firm that is dealing with about the infrastructure side of things. So they've announced they're going to develop a network of vertiports in the Ras Al Khaimah region, traditionally an area where more for sort of the business aviation or the VIPs going from the top of Dubai into the center where you've got the main attractions there as well. But this is collaboration between the Transport Authority there, the Tourism Development Authority, as well as Skyports. And as I said, introducing electric air taxis within the Emirate by 2027. So this partnership, it's going to, as I said, develop that network of vertiports to connect those key attractions, but really propelling the area as a destination of future. So the reason why I've chosen this, and it's worth noting that when I sent this article in for consideration for this conversation, there's been about half a dozen other stories that have been focusing on the Middle East as a particular region as well. We have the Future, I think it's the Future Aviation Forum in Saudi Arabia that was last week, and we saw a lot of focus and emphasis from Joby Aviation and Archer Aviation as well, where they're having conversations with very senior leadership people within Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as well. So I guess the conversation is, Skyports is just one of many stories that we're seeing at eVTOL Insights about the region. Joby and Archer are very much pushing on 2026 as being that time for setting up operations as well. And when I spoke to Duncan Walker, who is the CEO of Skyports at the Dubai Air Show in November last year, he was very complimentary of the coordination, buy-in from senior government level, and also the proactiveness of making things happen as well. So it's not a case of we'll see what happens. They're very much dead set on making sure it does happen as well. So I just wanted to bring to the table the conversation about how, when people ask me which region could be the first to deploy air taxis, I think Middle East is definitely one that can be put in for that consideration as well.
Do you think that's because they're rapidly building new infrastructure? When I look at UAE, I look at Abu Dhabi in general, it seems like there's a lot of investment on new infrastructure right now, building entirely new cities. So do you think that kind of gives them a leg up, that they're kind of building from scratch without as much interference in the airspace? Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's, I know Skyports also have revealed vertiport designs at DXB, so Dubai International Airport, which were approved by the ruler of Dubai himself as well. I think there's so much capital over there that can be spent on as well. I'm sure we all know about Neom, the mega city in Saudi Arabia, that I know Volocopter are working with the German OEM to potentially have air taxi operations in there as well. Lilium have also conducted flight tests in Saudi Arabia, or have announced deals with Saudi Arabia Airlines as well. So yeah, going back onto your question, Mark, I think there's I don't know from an expert's perspective in terms of the airspace there, but I think the capital that they've got to build, and they've got the space to build it, I think gives them a bit of a sort of a winning platform from that too. Again, though, it's I think also the weather is a key thing to sort of take into, and I'd welcome Rex's points on this from the infrastructure side of things too, how that's really essentially they've got a blank canvas to sort of build these things as well. So I think it's really exciting to see what the next couple of years will have for the Middle East, and kind of the region itself. But it's if I had a crystal ball to see what could happen in the near future, I just think the Dubai Air Show in November really showed a lot of people kind of how important they regarded advanced air mobility. So it'd be interesting to see then for the next air show in 2025, could we have air taxi demonstrations? Could we be seeing maybe the first sort of vertical or first signs of that happening? There's still a long way to go, just to say, but I think it's very exciting to see kind of the developments that have happened in a short space of time.
Yeah, I would say as a block of nations together, you don't want to generalize too much, but it does seem like specifically AAM or even drone technology is of primary interest to the region. So Yolanka, any questions for Jason about this topic?
Yeah, Jason, great. Thanks for sharing this. And I share your views kind of on the reasons to be looking at the Middle East as a leader in deploying advanced air mobility. And it's exciting to have that, because I think one of the really key pieces right now is to get some examples out there, to get some operations going wherever they are. I'm curious also, you listed several factors that you thought kind of helped the Middle East lean into being a leader here. I'm also curious about use case. There seems to be a lot of opportunity here to build this, as this article talks about, into tourism, for instance. And when I think about, what we've seen in the US, we've certainly seen areas like Orlando look at tourism as a factor in building out advanced air mobility system. So I'm curious your thoughts about use case or particular mission type as a factor in this.
Sorry, Yolanka, I had a bit of issues with putting myself off on mute as well. Great questions as well, and I think the tourism side of it is, I feel and believe there's a lot of emphasis on bringing people into the region as well for the tourism side. Again, it's another really good use case for additional revenue for that too. It's worth noting on another article we did, I know Joby Aviation and Archer were looking to set a network that could link, for example, Ras Al Khaimah into areas like like the Palm, like the very key tourist attractions within Dubai as well. So I definitely think the tourism side of things is going to be absolutely crucial as well. The good thing I think with Dubai is that the freeways are 7 lanes long, so there's not so much, I would say, congestion into like the main. While there is still congestion, I think it's another optional for those that can use it in the first instance to get from A to B within Dubai, or even do those those sightseeing buses that we all see in the cities as well, to use an eVTOL aircraft that's more quicker, more efficient, to do a bit of a sort of a bird's eye view of the city as well. So I think definitely the tourists use case, and I know EHang in China are utilizing that very well in China from that too. So I think the tourism side is a really important part of that too. I also think, and I know that it's happened in the US as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if we'll see sort of the other use cases for it with the drone side of things. So doing the inspections sort of things, and a good contact of mine, Judy Garland at Avtrain, with drones, if it's dull, dirty and dangerous, you get a drone to do it rather than a human as well. So there's a lot of use cases for sort of like the oil inspections, the sort of the other utilities that would be just as important, as we all know, for that too. And then also the medevac and the medical emergencies, as I know that Rex was pointing on earlier in the conversation as well. So I think the Middle East is very quickly picking up what those key use cases are, whether it's the delivery. I wouldn't say it was much for the deliveries to the remote communities, but I think there might be some sort of a use case there, but not as much as, for example, the likes of remote parts of Africa, even parts of, for example, Canada, or even sort of in those sort of vicinities as well. So tourism, medevac are definitely two real key ones, as well as the passenger shuttles that we all know as well. So I hope that's kind of answered it, Yolanka. I do know I'm very conscious of just getting the bone and running with it as well. So I'm happy to provide any more assistance to that too, if that helps.
So we've got 2 questions from the audience, and I'll throw this to the entire panel. Is anyone addressing the electrical infrastructure supply chain issues? Right now, power transformers are a 2.5-year lead time with prices skyrocketing. And then the next question, that's from Chris Jenseth, super fan. So next question we'll hold off from Rob, but can anybody answer Chris's question?
No, Mike, I would say Chris has got a really good topic there, in that the one group that's paying very close attention to that here in the United States, at least, is the folks at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratories. They've partnered with and been under contract. They're a government agency with the FAA in developing guidance for vertiports, specifically on the charging. There's a couple of white papers that they've released in the last year, and part of that is what's the health of a grid, what's the access to power, and what's it mean when you have to actually bring power to a site. And that piece is one of 3 that we looked at and having discussions the last year. Was, if I want to put in infrastructure and I have to bring power to it, and I have to actually put in a substation to accomplish that, it's a 2-year process to permit that substation. It's then a 2-year process to build that substation. And as he indicated, a lot of the components that are required are on back order 18 to 24 months. That then becomes the challenge. How do I convince someone to invest in something that may not materialize for 5 years? That's hard.
Yeah, well, promise a lot of money. That's one answer. But yes, the power considerations are something that don't come up, I think, enough, because ultimately they also define the frame itself, right? So if you have 6 rotors going, how much power does that take versus the single rotor of a helicopter? Yeah, I think power is not often a consideration. So good question from Chris. Next question from
Oh,
Rob.
I'm sorry. Could I jump in just
sure.
on one further comment on that? I think Cami just did a conference in Dallas with NREL on this topic, sustainable aviation energy, and I think one of the pieces that came out of that, and that we're certainly seeing, is that this is a great place to be bringing in metropolitan planning organizations, those federally mandated, federally funded organizations that look at regional transportation in the United States and understand that electrical infrastructure, charging infrastructure, is not limited to one mode. And to the degree we can plan and build this to serve multiple modes of transportation, the more efficiencies we can get from building out this expensive infrastructure. I'll leave it at that.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. So another electrical question. So do you see the electrical grids to be superior in the Middle East for scalable flights? I'm going to chime in and just say that depends on the country. So and also even on the city. I know, for example, Dubai, their largest skyscraper, has drainage problems, so that they have to send trucks every morning just to take away the sewage. So it really does. That's probably dependent on the region, but maybe Jason has some more insights based on his experience.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike. And I know the electrification side of things is always a really, really big thing as well, because again, if you we can build the aircraft, but we need the infrastructure for them to land. And also, I guess, these aircrafts, they're much bigger than the automobiles and the electric cars that I know we sort of tend to compare with as well. So, the charging cycles, what do we do with the batteries that have been used? The recharging cycle, the circular economy, where we then replenish what's lost from that too. In terms of the electrification, and as you were touching upon as well, Mike, unfortunately, I can't go into too much detail just because we don't know. I don't know enough about kind of the requirements from Dubai for the electrical side of it as well. But I do know that Skyports, as I mentioned, they deal with all the infrastructure side and the vertiport things. So they're working very closely with the Road Transport Authority, the various utility companies that are in there. And from what, again, I heard from Duncan when I spoke to him at the Dubai Air Show, they're very proactive, very open, and having those discussions. What would it require to enable a vertiport to be at X, Y, and Z, or multiple locations throughout Dubai? And then I guess once they've used that as a blueprint, how can that then be replicated in regions like Ras Al Khaimah or in regions like Abu Dhabi, for example? So I think Dubai is a great example to see kind of what's happening. So in answer to the gentleman's question, I think it's a sort of an early stage at the moment, but I hope to provide more updates kind of in the coming months and as we get close to that 2026 sort of deadline as well. So yeah, can't give as too much detail as well, but I know that all the relevant works are being taken place to ensure that there is enough electrification to make this a reality.
Great. Alistair, any questions about Middle East development, electricity, etc., or risks therein?
Yeah, my theory, Jason, I want you to tell me if you think I'm wrong or right, but I've been trying to figure out what I think the markers are for all of the launch markets, for all of the earliest countries to adopt advanced air mobility technologies. I think it's a combination of two things, and I think you have to have both. You've got to have financial resource, and you've got to have a local aviation regulator who wants it to happen and isn't tied back by all sorts of red tape at the government level. Oh, I got balloons. I didn't do that. How did I do that?
I don't know.
Anyway,
that's the first time I've seen that.
Yeah, the intersection of those two things.
I don't think you're wrong, to be honest, Alistair, as well. Is again the GCAA, the General Civil Aviation Authority in Dubai, again very proactive, having those discussions with Joby, Archer, those companies that are saying we want to bring our air taxi service to the region as well. And absolutely, financial capital is crucial for getting this off the ground as well. We know all how much it is to build, certify, and develop these things, but it's more than just the aircraft as well. It's all the other infrastructure side of it as well. So yeah, I concur with you on that, Alistair. I think those two factors are very key to use when judging which regions will be the first to market in this kind of race, shall we say.
Great. Rex, final thoughts, and then we're going to close out the show.
No, I think when you look at what Jason's been talking about, there's a couple layers here that we deal with. In the United States, I have multiple layers of bureaucracy. So I have federal, state, county, and city. Move across the border to Canada, and I want to put a heliport in there. I really only have to deal with the Transport Canada. I go to Saudi Arabia, I only really have to deal with GACA. So in the aspect of regulations and bureaucracy, we're a little heavy compared to some of our friends in the Middle East. So that being said, the other piece of this puzzle I think that we pay attention to is how many different types of infrastructure are we going to spend money on? Am I going to have a heliport, a vertiport, a drone port, a stall port, and an airport? Or am I going to have a port? Because I only have so much real estate in downtown environments, and I only have so much money. So that's one of those things we look at multimodal. And I know there's people that hate this term. I said, what's a multi-port? I don't have enough money to build 4 different ports. I have enough money to build one port, and I want everybody to come